We live in literally data center alley. I drive past 20 data centers on the way to the grocery store, and there have always been more under construction.
Ryan Sholin lives outside of Washington, D.C., in a place known as Data Center Alley. As a strategic account manager for electricity maps, he spends his days trying to decarbonize the industry that funds his county. But before that, he spent 7 years at Automattic, the company who makes WordPress. And Automattic wasn't quite ready to put sustainability front and center. If you work at a company who's not prioritizing climate, this is a great episode for you. We're going to talk about the F-grade email from a customer that sent Riot down a rabbit hole. We're going to talk about the ERG funding hack that got his team trained up on sustainability. And we're going to talk about Ryan's framework for doing the math that made a dent with leadership. This is Ryan Sholin, and I'm Louisa Henry. Ryan, thanks so much for joining. For people who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun to listen to the podcast and to get to know some of the stories of the people that you've been talking with too. I'm Ryan Sholin. These days, I work at Electricity Maps, where I am a strategic account manager and advocacy lead. I work with some of our largest customers, which are mostly hyperscalers, to help them ideally decarbonize through the magic of data and transparency and understanding what's going on the electrical grid around the world at any given time. I've been in some form or another in sustainability for only the last year and a half or so. And before that, I've had lots of roles that we'll talk a little bit about, but definitely have a background that is not in sustainability and have really come to this pretty recently. So really excited just to be working in this area and trying to help push some good ideas forward.
Yeah, you have a really cool career arc, and I'm excited to get into that. But before we do, can you tell us a little bit more about you as a human, where you live, your family, your community?
Sure, absolutely. So I've been in Northern Virginia for the last 16 years. I always look at the calendar when I say that. I'm like, when did we close on this house? So we've been in the same place for the whole time.
Oh, that's
Myself, my
cool.
wife, and our two kids who are 18 and 15, depending on when this comes out. Their birthdays are soon.
Oh, nice.
And our daughter is in college. I'm actually going to pick her up in a few days from her first year at University of Mary Washington. My son's a sophomore, and after this, I've got to go to a JV soccer game, which is a usual one of our routines this time of year.
The county you live in, can you go into that?
Sure. I mean, I just said Northern Virginia, which is a broad thing, about an hour outside DC, but we live in Loudoun County, specifically in Ashburn, which, if you're familiar, if you have ever, wondered about where your data center is, if you use AWS or GCP or Azure or any of those things, it is probably here.
Hmm.
We live in literally data center alley. I always say, and people have heard this, if you've ever heard me talk about this, you've heard me say this before, but I drive past 20 data centers on the way to the grocery store. That I did that count years ago. So there
Okay.
are obviously many more, and there have always been more under construction. So it's been really interesting to see the area change since we moved in 2010. I always describe it as in the DARPANET days, in the beginning of the internet, there was a router not too far from here. And just if you
Huh.
think of any network and any sort of network hub,
Yeah.
one existed here. And so AOL made its headquarters, America Online, for those of you that are my age. We were early customers in my house growing up, for sure. But AOL headquarters were right where the grocery store is, in fact.
Interesting.
In many cases, I drive by the data centers, but they're not backing up to my backyard, increasingly because of different, I don't want to say loopholes because they're just holes, right?
Mm.
Different opportunities that data center developers have taken. We're hearing more and more stories about whoops, the data center backs up to your backyard. Sorry.
Yeah.
And things are just the way they are. That's not what we feel where we live, but we've seen the development for sure. And I mean, I will say, it's a little bit different driving around and seeing oh, they're doing some construction over there this week. What are they doing? Oh, they're pulling up fiber to make a new connection. right?
Mm,
Like
mm-hmm.
it's fiber connectivity, pickup trucks on the side of the road with very colorful cables sticking out of the ground. And that's what
Yeah.
they're working with, not necessarily like drainage or the power lines, but it's always new connections happening.
Yeah, and I imagine all of that money in that area, like, how does that impact your town's financials and, like, that part of things?
It's really interesting. And whenever people talk about data centers and their effect on different municipalities and local life, I feel like we're privileged here in many ways, but Loudoun County as a municipality has been very, I would say generally like smart about this for a long time.
Hmm,
In the 2000s, at some point, they decided, okay, data centers are going to pay property tax at a really high rate. And what that means is that they're paying tax on all of the equipment that's inside the data centers. So here we are in, by some measures, one of the wealthiest counties in the country. When you look at things like median home price or even median income, we're way up there on the list.
hmm.
And yet data centers pay just about 50% of our property taxes.
Oh, wow.
The way that this shows up is, I think at the end of last year, there was something like $192 million surplus
Wow.
at the end of a year, which for a municipality is like, oh, I guess we'll spend 60 million more on schools, to which I say, yes, please, of course.
Right,
Um,
right.
it raises a lot of questions about whether we're putting all our eggs in one basket and what does equilibrium look like for a municipality supported by one industry. I mean, if it were a paper mill, right, and we
Uh-huh.
were a town, you might worry like, oh, what if paper gets disintermediated in some way? I think of like we lived in Rochester for a year and you could go drive around the Kodak campus and it was like a wasteland. There were
Hmm.
lots and lots of closed buildings, buildings getting demolished all the time, lots of stories of people that, because it was a company town and the company didn't function anymore. So I do, on one hand, I'm like, yes, let's get to fusion energy and quantum computing and we won't need any of this. And on the other hand, I'm like, and that would be a lot less money for the place that I live. We'd have to come up with another solution.
Yeah, what an interesting tension that this is, like, not only, what you're doing now for a living, working at electricity maps, but also the tension of being living in this neighborhood and, like, some interesting, tensions you're wrestling with, I can imagine.
Well, and as I've always worked in some form of like online product management or software, I joke that everybody else in the neighborhood does the same sort of work, but most of them have top secret clearances.
Yeah.
So there are
Okay.
lots of people who depend on this industry or work in it, but
Yeah.
also are tied to government work as well. So there's a
Mm,
lot of, it's a dynamic time, let's just say, in the
yeah.
neighborhood for where people are working and what they're working on.
Well, let's talk about that work that you did before working in electricity. What was your job? Most people wouldn't call it a climate job.
Sure. So, I mean, immediately before Electricity Maps, I spent 7 years at a company called Automattic with two T's, where I worked on the WordPress VIP team, which was sort of a company within the company.
Mhm.
Automattic is a big commercial company in the WordPress ecosystem. If you're familiar with WordPress, the open source content management system,
Like blogging software.
exactly, blogging software, something
Mhm.
like 40% of all websites run on WordPress.
Oh, wow.
It's open source, and so I was selling, supporting, maintaining, advising, consulting, partnering, anything that you can do on the business side with enterprise customers like Salesforce and News Corps and NASA.
Okay.
It was extremely interesting. It was a wonderful team, fully distributed company, which is something that I really valued. Always fielding the most interesting possible questions about running a website, right? And whether
Mhm.
that was basic stuff like performance and security, finding kind of like the right solution from the open source ecosystem to say, here is the best WordPress plugin to do X,
Okay.
for a company that is like a Fortune 100 company and cares a lot about security and accessibility. And it can't really be something maintained by, ideally at least, not something maintained by a random person that doesn't care about that. But in a lot of cases, you would find the best piece of the ecosystem, or from the other direction, including with customers slash partners like Salesforce, build the best solution for the WordPress ecosystem with the partner.
Mm.
Um, so I was doing that sort of work. And towards the end of that run, I started fielding questions that weren't directly about sustainability, but they were about how a customer could get its website that it had somebody there had typed their domain, somebody in management had typed their domain, right?
I'd love to talk specifics on this. Like, do you
Yep.
remember the moment or the customer, like what happened and where were you? And because I feel like this propelled you down a rabbit hole, and I'd love to get a sense for what that looked like.
I'm going to roll it back like 2 steps because there are a couple
Okay.
of milestones along the way there. The first time I really thought about sustainability at work at Automattic was when a colleague of mine in 2019, we were at a meetup in Rotterdam. This is like the legendary Rotterdam VIP meetup. If anybody's listening, they know what I'm talking
Mm.
about. We were probably about 90 people at the time.
Okay.
And so there were, it was a nice sequence of flash talks. It was like a feature of the meetup. 5-minute talks on any topic. And a colleague of mine, Jack Lennox, gave a talk that was a short version of something he had done at WordCamp Europe, which had been like a 50-minute talk. And you can go find this. And Jack talked about how performance for a website is sustainability. Basically, the same kinds of problems we were always solving for customers about
Hmm.
making their code run more smoothly with fewer errors meant that it used less energy, right?
Yeah,
So
makes sense.
speed, performance, like anything you could do to make a website run more smoothly actually made it use less energy. That was the first eye-opening moment. It was just like, oh, like we can have an impact about climate. Like I cared about climate, but it had never occurred to me working on websites that we could do something about it.
Yeah, no, it honestly never occurred to me either. So yeah, it makes sense that this was like a eye-opening moment, which is great.
I hadn't quite made the connection, even though I'd been inside one of our data centers once, which might be an earlier callback, just to understand, not just from living here, but from going inside, that the cloud
Yeah,
is not an ethereal, like thing in the wires. It is very physical and it is loud and there are lots of fans and the temperature matters. So the physicality of the cloud was not lost on me.
yeah.
Hearing Jack talk about that there was something we could do about it was wonderful news to me. A few years later, another one of my colleagues in another sort of like all hands meeting asked a question to an executive, basically saying like, is there something we can do to help our customers with this problem of sustainability of their
Hmm.
websites? And the response from management, I didn't really love at the time. It was kind of like, well, it really doesn't matter. There's not much we can do. Servers are going to run anyway.
Mm.
To which I kind of like, pulled out my hair. I think I was already reading maybe Ministry for the Future at that point. And I remembered Jack's talk. Oh my gosh.
Strongly recommend.
Whew. I mean, the first 50 pages of that book will radicalize you if you aren't already there, much
100%.
less the rest of it. It is predictive in lots of scary ways and predictive in lots of hopeful ways too. Highly recommended to everybody. Ministry for the Future is hardcore.
Yeah, me too.
Um, so I, having like read that pretty recently, I was when this response came and it was like, nah, we can't really do much. It's like, no, that can't be right. And I went off and found the sustainability group at Automattic. There were a small number of people, and I knew that there had been turnover because everybody who had led sustainability efforts at Automattic one by one had left to go work on sustainability full time, or in my colleague Jack's case, he actually ran for office and won in UK, won a local seat
Oh, wow.
representing the Green Party.
Cool.
And there I was coming to the sustainability team saying, what are we up to? Why haven't we done our latest, kind of report and bought offsets? We haven't bought anything since 2021. What's holding it up? And what was holding it up was just, like any group of volunteers, it was
Mm.
not anybody's job. And wait, where are we? Any job can be a climate job? Like this was the moment where it was like, okay, well, if it's nobody's job full time, I guess we can work on this together and try to solve the problem.
Okay, so it's a little bit stagnant when you rolled in. Had some momentum beforehand, and then people left. Nobody picked things up, and you're here to kind of reignite.
I want to say, like, there were people working on the problem. They were mostly on the engineering side. And in my role, and again, like 6, 7 years into my role, I had a little bit more cachet, like a little bit more internal cultural knowledge about how to navigate the system to get things done.
Very important.
Right. And so I kind of swung in, made a big post, tagged the right people, kind of saying like, here are 10 things that we could do for our customers to help them make progress on this.
What were some of those things? And how did it land?
Ooh,
Did anything move?
this is the thing about any volunteer organization. If you raise your hand and say something is wrong here, the answer is like, great, I see you volunteering, Ryan.
Yep.
Please come help us fix it.
Mm,
And that was really the case. Like the kinds of things I was saying we could do were, of course, performance and sustainability, right? We could make progress in this. I was saying that we could look at our data centers, and right around this time is when a customer based in the EU had plugged in their domain into an online carbon website checker and
okay.
said, Ryan, we get an F. Why do we get an F? How do we get an A? And at that point, I knew just enough to be dangerous. And I was like, great, let me talk to your sustainability people about the carbon accounting. We're really, and they were like, no. I plugged in my domain. I got an F. How do I get an A? Like
Mm,
that's the goal I'm trying to achieve.
yeah.
Um, and that's really what set me on the path of talking to folks at the Green Web Foundation and trying to understand how their sort of ranking system worked. It also, and one of the first things they told me was like, great, go get the sustainability reports from your data centers. And so again, like all of this was new at the time, or new
Okay.
to me at the time.
Yeah.
So it set me down the path of learning about how corporate sustainability reporting worked.
So what actually moved with so you're digging in, you're like, you have this customer with an F, you're gonna go figure it out. You ask the data centers for the reports, you start digging in, make some proposals.
Two things happened. One was that because I came from the business side and knew that we were going to need to, maybe buy software to help, make some investment, get some commitment from an engineering team on the platform side to properly
Yeah.
measure and report, we did the math. We said, okay, if this customer is asking this question and another customer has asked this question, what is the financial risk? Right? What if these
Mm.
customers churned because we can't give them the sustainability data that they're asking for?
Mhm.
What if they churn because we're not a green web host? What if they churn because they can't get an A when they plug their domain into the carbon website checker?
So
Um,
this is kind of you and the team doing the math to see if this is even worth digging into. Like, should we put engineering resources on this?
Got to be able to provide some ROI,
Mhm.
and as democratized a company and flat a management structure as Automattic had at the time, you know, you still couldn't say like, "Oh, I need to go spend $25,000 on software to help us do this right. Let me do that. Let me have resources from an engineering team that's very focused on building the platform and improving it for our customers, because we have to add this other measurement piece, right? Like I couldn't get any of that for free.
Okay, so you're like, this customer is worth this much money based off of their contract value and how long we expect them to stay with us. If they were to churn, it would cost us this much. And did you have other customers asking for this too, or did you do some sort of like extrapolation to assume other customers were thinking this?
Yes and yes. We had other customers asking the question, but then we also were able to look at our customers as we learned about these things, right? As we learned about corporate accounting standards that were coming down soon, CSRD in the EU.
Yeah.
Again, like this is the first time I kind of did the research on what are the compliance regulations coming soon that will require our customers to write these reports for which they will ask us for data. So just with
Mm-hmm.
a handful of European customers that had asked or we knew would, we had a seven-figure number on the table that said like, this is the revenue that's at risk.
I want to pause for just a second because I think what you're saying is important for two reasons. One, people at companies who might be listening, thinking about how they can make a case internally. And, I think you've provided some good ideas there. But also, as a customer buying, your customers that were wanting to use WordPress, they had the say, like their voice mattered more than maybe they knew. And, I think that's really important for anybody listening to hear too. Like you can pressure your suppliers or whoever you're buying product from, whether that be as you as a personal consumer or you as a business purchaser. And it's really powerful.
Those are the two things that I even today tell people about how to get things done.
Hmm.
One is do the math. Find the customers that could churn if you don't do this. And that is a really strong way internally to make the case for whatever it is you need to do, whether it's get training, buy software, engage an outside agency to do the work. Whatever your starting point is, that is a way to get it funded. And from the outside, if you are a customer of one of these companies and you want more data, you really have to raise your hand and say so.
Mm.
And it's a lot of these companies have made progress. I mean, even in the past year, I remember a year ago at SF Climate Week, someone from a software company that's large enough that their products are household names to all of us, they were complaining that they could not get, I think at the time it was like they wanted good scope 3 data, right?
Okay.
They wanted good sustainability data from their cloud provider. And even them, this household name could not get it. They just kind of they said no, we don't really do that right now, but we'll take
Wow.
your submission into account. So eventually, though, over the past year, that same company has opened up a lot more and done some of the things that this customer was asking for.
Yeah, it kind of pecks away at some of these bigger companies. They might not be as nimble to react, but it does add up and it makes a difference. I equate it to I vegetarian since I was 15, and when Impossible and Beyond came out, I was like,
Mm.
yeah, like finally my hard work has been coming up. So you started making a case. Did some things change? Did you get engineering resources?
We got ourselves training, which was a big step. There's not going to be an end to this story where I say, and then we got everything we wanted and it was great.
Yeah.
That didn't happen, but
Well, we can learn a lot from where we get stuck too. So I'm happy you're sharing.
no, of course, and one really smart trick that one of my colleagues pulled is for this volunteer group, this employee resource group, and of course in Automattic we called them Automatician Resource Groups, ARGs. We had a certain amount of funding for the year that we were supposed to, like, I don't know, throw a meetup, get together, work on problems.
Okay.
We're spread all over the world. There was no way that the sustainability group was going to be like, let's all get on airplanes and meet in London. It's not going to happen.
Right.
We did that enough with our own teams. We did not want to spend the carbon on doing it. And so my colleague was like, talked to HR and figured out, okay, we can use this money to send ourselves to one of these sustainability accelerators and learn how to do carbon accounting ourselves.
Mm.
And in the end, we went to OPF Academy, 1.5 Academy,
Okay.
where we spent 6 weeks, a couple hours a week doing online coursework and meetings and some group work, and came out of it knowing just a lot more than we went in about carbon accounting. And all of these accelerators have certain specialties, and this one leaned a little more towards the corporate side of things. It was still extremely broad. Like, I remember doing labs on, like, let's work out the scope 3 carbon emissions of, Levi's blue jeans, right? Thinking about the water impact, thinking about downstream, thinking about recycling, thinking about ink, putting all these things sort of into the
Yeah, it's a good
spreadsheet to
thought
do the
exercise.
math.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
anytime you do like a product carbon footprint or like a life cycle analysis of something, it's really
Yeah,
helpful to think about where things come from and where they go. So
totally.
applying that to, computing is where we started learning then. And I've obviously learned much more about the materials involved, what happens afterwards, the water involved, what happens to that, and of course the electricity involved, where it's coming from, and then how that's different at different times of the day and month and year. All of which is to say, like, we got ourselves training, and most of us, I'll say the majority of people that got that training have since left Automatic.
Yeah.
And not necessarily because we couldn't push sustainability forward, but it's a little bit like, for me at least, once I'd opened that box, I wanted to work on it full time.
Right.
So I made the decision to leave and to spend some time kind of pivoting the climate, right? As one does. Just for me, that was my chance to
Mm.
get into this full time.
Yeah. No, it's a great path. I mean, you found something really interesting at work. You tried to push it forward and then ultimately use that for your next move. So internally, what didn't move? Where did you keep hitting the same wall? And reflecting back, would you approach anything differently?
It's a really good question. Um, we probably had the data that we needed to do the math, and where we where we probably got caught up a little bit is in trying to do a better job than our predecessors had done of making it permanent and not just kind of a one-off exercise.
Like embedding it into the system somehow, like into process?
Exactly. Yes. Making it an annual routine and not just something that only happened if somebody there was interested.
What is it that you'd have an annual routine? Like your sustainability reports?
Well, so I mean, that's the thing. We didn't really have any official sustainability report. We had a page on the website
Okay.
and it hadn't changed for a few years. The last time that someone had, and when I say done the math, I mean they had looked at the electricity, at least with very broad averages that we used in a very broad way to run all of our servers, right? Automattic
Okay.
runs on private cloud. So it wasn't like we were getting data from AWS or GCP or Azure. It was our data from three and then a fourth origin data center and from edge data centers around the world. So we really had to go into our own dashboards, pull reports, perhaps argue too much about like the accuracy of those
Mhm.
reports and about the right way to break them down and the right way to
Yeah.
think about them. And, as with anything else with analytics, when you have hundreds or thousands or millions of customers, depending on what product line we were talking about, it becomes challenging to then say, this energy belongs to this customer, right? This is what we
Yeah.
can attribute. It can be done, but we were trying to do it right. And I think we definitely, perfect being the enemy of good as usual. We want it to get somewhere closer to perfect and to get to something repeatable. And I'm tempted to go look and see like if the sustainability page is still there and it's
Yeah, I'm
2021
curious
state,
too. Mhm.
right? Because at the time it was like, okay, this is the energy that we used. This is what we estimate we did when it comes to flights. Let's take those two categories, which are probably the biggest, and we're going to buy some high value carbon offsets. Like at the time, there was a phrase that meant we think these are pretty much verified and good, and we invested in some like cook stove projects in the global south, and did some things that looked good at the time. And that through a lens a few years later on just the voluntary carbon market in general, we might have been a little
Yeah.
more skeptical. So again, like trying to get every piece of that cycle right the first time definitely made us a little slower to get to action and to get to value. That was on us. I think the struggle of thinking that we had to go hat in hand to lots of different departments to get this information was also something that held things up.
Yeah, that you thought you had to? You don't think you had to looking back?
We needed to, but one of the other catches is that that ROI calculation was for one division of the company. And
Mm.
I'd say like the most active two or three of us in the group were from one division of the company. So it became a little bit of an executive telephone game too, to say to, the CEO of WordPress VIP, like, this is what we need. Can you go ask the CEO of Automattic?
Yeah.
And again, there are two sides, right? Like sustainability should be built into everybody's job. But if it is absolutely nobody's job, it can become challenging and this was our experience at least, it became challenging for us to figure out who do we need approval from.
So if somebody's sitting at a company like that, like hopefully Automatic has changed in the last, however many years and they're different now, but if somebody's at a company like you're describing, what advice do you have for them as far as how to approach or tackle or where do they start?
I think it is, you might not need the $25,000 a year software, right? Like it is when we do our training, we go to OPF, when we learn how to do carbon accounting, um, sometimes there's a little bit of looking down our nose a little bit at spreadsheets, like, we don't want to just
Mm.
do this once with spreadsheets. Let's buy software and do this properly and make it a permanent feature of what we do. That can slow us down sometimes. If you have enough data to get started, go for it. Like
Mm.
there's nothing stopping you from building the spreadsheet, and that will help you also find out what could our impact be, right? What is the delta between that F and the A? How could we
The
talk
F and
about
the
this in a
A.
way? The customer that plugged their website in and got an F and wanted to know how to get an A, from the perspective of us as a company, like, well, if we did the math and it said like, oh, actually, we are doing much better than our competition, right? We're doing much better than the benchmark for our industry. There are lots of ways that it could have been a positive story for us,
Yeah.
not just a, oh, here's this slog of
More work we got
accounting
to
to
do.
do.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Mhm. And
Um,
so what's the data that you think people should get at first? Given that you've gone to this training and everything, like, do you if you're doing it on your own, you probably have to do some amount of research to learn something. Where would you have people start?
wow. Okay. I'm not that it's so like if we're talking about just corporate accounting, like it's so broad.
Yeah.
I think what you will hear from everybody is that there's a crawl, walk, run to it, and spend data is the easiest way to get started, right? And
Okay.
that was our thinking too. Like we wouldn't have to know what people ordered at every restaurant at every meetup to say, oh, this was beef and it has more carbon costs than the vegan meal. But if we had had a total number of what was spending at restaurants and what was spending on flights and what was spending on events, we could have applied standard emissions factors for those.
So start to get like rough ballpark ideas, and then you can get more and more fidelity over time, or maybe in the hotspot areas that you want to dive into.
And that's what I think it's easy for me to generalize and say that's what everybody does, right? When you're getting started with this, if you are not a massive like Fortune 500 company, you don't need a lot of fidelity. You can start with here is our spending in three or four big categories and build from there.
Yeah.
Because we were aspiring to report back to our customers, this is the carbon cost of your computing. That's where, obviously like tools like electricity maps would be helpful. But first of all, just knowing what is the energy that we're using in our data
Yeah.
centers is definitely a step. If you are using a major cloud provider, like there are dashboards for this, you can get to them and find out. If you're not, and if you're private cloud like we were, then, you know, you want to talk to your platform team about what's available and like to say like Grafana, Kibana, Prometheus, whatever you're using. I don't know the names of all of them for every platform, but
Yeah.
you get the idea. You're looking at analytics, getting some data, doing some math.
Yeah, so it sounds like the reflection you have is maybe you started to try to run before you could crawl, and you were like jumping straight to software or bigger asks of different teams, which might have caused it to fall flat, and maybe a smaller iterative approach would have been a better approach.
I think it would have been a better approach, but also, the full featured version was probably what we wanted to offer our customers based
Yeah,
on who
right.
we were and what we did, right? Like we were sort of a run solution. So it was definitely a little bit aligned with how we did business was to say, this is the best possible way to do this. We're going to do it. We're going to provide you with the data. And it was a challenge. And I don't know if they have done it since then, but certainly as I reflect on it now, I would have a better idea now of how to build that first spreadsheet without a lot of internal hand wringing over whether it was exactly correct or not. It would still be really interesting directional data.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you make the decision to leave Automatic. What did that leave cost you? What did staying 7 years cost you?
I loved my 7 years at Automatic, and I mentioned like I felt like I was a part of the culture and had a lot of institutional knowledge. There was a running joke that I was Dr. Sholin. And my
Mm.
wife, meanwhile, has a PhD in physics, so I would say, "No, Dr. Sholin is my wife." Um, see, it's good.
That's
Um,
good.
and by the end of that time, I did feel like I was a little bit of a crutch, right? Like, it was a little
Mm,
too easy for people to come to me with answers or with questions.
yeah,
So much so that I built a bunch of knowledge towards the end into a little AI bot. So it was
there you
still kind
go.
of early in
Ahead of your
Gen AI.
times. Yeah.
No, I was already behind, but, like, that was the moment where I got on up to speed, where I said, like, "Great, talk to Dr. Scholenbach. Like, ask
Mhm.
Dr. Scholin this question," and maybe there were, like, 2 people that used it, but, it was a good exercise for me too. But, yeah, I mean, walking away from that and moving into another industry, it's not the first time that I've made that sort of change in my career,
Yeah.
but it definitely meant giving up a comfortable position in an ecosystem where I knew a lot of people, where I had a huge network, to go to something that was almost completely new to me. So that was a little bit of a leap for sure.
For me, similar, not as much institutional knowledge. I don't think I was known as a doctor around the area, but the shift out of tech for me and moving into climate was a financial, like, math problem and struggle for me. The mission was obvious. I'm curious if you found a similar thing in your move.
Yes, yes, and there have been parallels in my career before. Like when I went from corporate media to a nonprofit news organization,
Mm,
I gave up some salary
yeah.
to feel better about the work I was doing. And so again, when I left kind of semi corporate tech to move into sustainability, I definitely gave up a substantial chunk of salary to move into work that feels good every day, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's always a trade off that we make. Anytime you make that sort of move, and having swung between big companies and little companies, like it's not our first rodeo as a family also for saying like, hey, I want to make this change, want to feel good when I wake up in the morning and go to work. What do you think? And I'm lucky to have a family that supports me in that.
Yeah.
um, and we make it work, and it's not something that I worry about every day, which I'm thankful for. But it is something that I think about and wonder, like, okay, well, what would I be working on if I had stayed? Um, who would I be working with? And
Mhm.
it has made it a little bit easier that there has been a lot of change in Automattic and in the WordPress ecosystem. And so a lot of my best friends left not too long after I did. And
Okay.
so we're all still in touch, right? The
Good.
group chat is still very active as the Slack DMs were.
Yep. And so you had options when you were moving. Why did you pick electricity maps?
So it was like a really interesting moment to be moving into sustainability. I left Automatic in October 2024, and I started Electricity Maps 6 months later in April 2025. And in that time, you know, because I really wanted to make this change and do it in a focused and a structured way. I used a process called Never Search Alone.
Oh,
There's
yeah,
this
me too.
community, right? You did Never Search Alone? Did we
I
talk
did.
about this?
I don't think we did. No, no.
Oh
But
my
yeah,
gosh.
I'm
Well, so
still with that group.
you know,
People are still going. Yeah.
oh my gosh. It was great. So Never Search Alone, there's a book, there's a big community. You get put into a group, a job. I forgot these
Job
things, a
search
job search
council.
council,
Yep.
a JSC, right? A job search council. And you work with a bunch of people that are in a similar place in their career that are looking for work. And there is a structure and a method to it. And at the end of the process, you get to something called candidate market fit, right?
Mhm.
Instead of product
Yep.
market fit, where you write your sort of mission statement that says, I am looking for this sort of role in this sort of company at this sort of level, with this sort of working situation. And it's not just about you, it's about the market and what's possible after you've looked around a little bit and talked to people and understood it. And where I got to was like, look, I want to work in software. This is what I know the most about. This is how I understand the world and computing, and where I can use all this experience that I have
Yeah.
doing product and partnerships and sales and understanding how that business works, bring that to bear in software. And so I looked at these carbon accounting software companies and their products. And eventually, like after doing some applying and poking around and talking to people, what I really found is that there were companies that were based in the EU that were trying to expand to the US, or maybe they didn't have anybody in the US yet. And those were the most interesting places for me, because of my experience working remotely, because of my experience kind of working independently. Like, go build a book of business for yourself as a salesperson with a sort of greenfield approach. That mindset really helped. And when I learned about electricity maps, and And this is me looking at the book on the corner here. Like, I read the Building Green
Okay.
Software O'Reilly book from Ann and
Uh-huh.
Sarah pretty early in that, maybe even before I left Automattic, before that 6 months. And so they mentioned electricity maps. I had heard about it in a couple places. Pretty early in my search, like I saw a job pop up that was to hire the first person in the US working for electricity maps, to work on what they were calling advocacy,
Hmm.
which was really about influencing standards and working with other organizations and coalitions and nonprofits, NGOs. The Green Software Foundation, for example, is somewhere that I still spend a lot of time to try and push forward some of the ideas about granular measurement, about you know getting the most detailed data possible about your electricity usage to have it be accurate and to have it be the most impactful when you then spend money on electricity. But I saw that job listing and I applied. And then something kind of magic happened. This was the end of January 2025. Yes,
Okay.
end of January 2025. I went to my first in person climate event. Like the first time I showed up in person for anything about climate was a DC Climate Week, like volunteer pre planning happy hour.
Okay.
And it was really just networking, is how it turned out. I was expecting there might be presentations, and no, it was happy hour. It was great. But it was also end of January, not too long after the inauguration. And there was already
Mm,
just an absolute dark cloud hanging over everything that had to do with clean energy in the US. Like it was already happening. There were people there from the EPA that had just very long faces. And every conversation was kind of like, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to
yeah.
work through this? What's on the other side of this? And so I happened to be in a conversation with some people about, I don't know, I think they said they were from Colorado. And I asked them, like, oh, why is there so much coal on the grid in Colorado? And they kind of looked back at me like, what? I'm like, there's so much coal on the grid in Colorado. And I pulled out my phone and showed them electricity maps. And it turned out one of them was from the Department of Energy.
Oh, wow.
And so we had a great conversation. And she introduced me to somebody else later. And it was excellent. She doesn't work there anymore, but she does work at a grid technology company. And so I went home that night and I was a little bit like, wait a minute, did I just do the job? Like that was the job. I was telling the Department of Energy about
Uh-huh.
electricity maps
Yeah.
and what's on oh, I think that might be the job. And I wrote Olivier, the electricity maps founder and CEO, I think that night or the next morning. And I said, like, I think I just did the job. And so I got my interview and, everything went smoothly from there.
Nice. That's great.
There was that moment where I realized, like, oh, I'm starting to understand this and I'm starting to know how to talk about it. And I'm in a place and in a position where I can have these conversations and have an impact.
So, that Colorado example, let's talk a little
Mm.
bit about electricity maps. And so, electricity maps is identifying where the electricity is coming from, and what types, or like if it's renewable or coal or whatever it is. How do you calculate that? Why is that important? Like, what happens, when I plug in my phone, and why does it matter?
It matters where and when you plug in your phone, where and when you charge your EV, where and when you run a heavy computing workload. Like all of these things matter. When you look at electricity maps, you'll see the whole world is broken up into grids, right? The electrical grid is not, I'll say, homogeneous. Like it's not like looking at Manhattan, right? It is not very smooth. And if you drive around your neighborhood and you see like, oh, there's one kind of power pole here and some high voltage lines there and these weird
Mm,
cylindrical transformers here, like it is a mosaic,
okay.
maybe. Right?
Generous way to paint the picture, yeah.
The grid regions that you see on electricity maps in Europe, it's like very clean and easy. One country, one grid region, one price. It's lovely. It's much easier to talk about. In the US, there are like 60 and they're all weird shapes and nothing is uniform and makes sense. The way that electricity
Mm,
has evolved in the US and that the grid has grown is not super logical sometimes. So you get where I live in Northern Virginia, we're part of PJM, which originally stood for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, but there are
Okay.
13 states in PJM now.
Oh, wow.
Um, so this is a physically connected grid that is also a market. And it means that you can't really pick an electron off the grid here and say, like, oh, this one is solar. It belongs to me. You kind of have to look at the whole thing. So when we talk about the electricity mix, every power plant in PJM is contributing to that mix. So there might be coal, there might be natural gas, there might be nuclear, there might be solar and wind, not enough of it in PJM, but growing. There might be hydroelectric power, right? So all of
Okay.
these different, and there's more than that, but all of these things, if you think of them as the ingredients of a smoothie, all get mixed up together because you can't sort of pick and choose which one is yours when we start measuring what is the carbon intensity of the electricity on the grid. That smoothie then in PJM kind of comes out orange, right? There's a lot of natural gas on the grid.
So the smoothie analogy is like a ratio of all the ingredients you're putting in your smoothie. Like it all
Yes.
kind of like the strawberries and bananas and blueberries all kind of go in the top at different amounts, and then it gets all blended together. And that's what you're saying. You can't pick one out and say this one comes from here and it's wind.
Not when you're measuring like what the direct impact is of the electricity you're using, right?
Okay.
So what we do is take those smoothie ingredients and monitor all of them. So we know from all of the data that's public that we're pulling from everywhere around the world, how much in any one of these grid zones is coming from any one electricity source at every moment in time, right? And every moment in time can mean hourly in a lot of cases. In some cases, in California, they report every 5 minutes. In
Wow.
Europe and India, it's every 15 minutes now. So there's some variation in the order of magnitude that we know about. But then because, and I mean, I've mentioned they're based in the EU. I'm here. Just about everybody else in electricity maps is in Copenhagen, Denmark, where
Okay.
there's a team of data engineers and data scientists that have built fantastic models. I'll say we use a lot of traditional machine learning and AI to build forecast models. And so we can also take countries that only report once a year and break it down into hourly based on what we know about their electricity mix once a year and what we know about other data inputs, which mostly means weather. Right.
Mm.
Like it's amazing how much just a very accurate weather forecast can help you understand how much solar, how much wind, how much hydro is on the grid anywhere at one time, because those are really key ingredients. Those have the most variation. So understanding them makes a big difference in a forecast.
Hmm. So should individuals care about when they're charging things at home?
You know, in every like conversation about climate change and sustainability, there's this point of like, well, the individual can do so much. If I only will recycle and compost, I can make so much of a difference. Yes, all individuals together, absolutely. I would love for corporations that are using much, 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 much more energy than we do in our houses to really bear
Yeah.
the brunt of paying attention to their electricity usage and putting more clean energy on the grid that to match what they're using, than I would say for individuals. That said, we have so much control these days when it comes to EVs, when it comes to heat pumps. You're in California, you have more than controls over this than I do here. But
Hmm.
if your house building business corporation, anything has electrified to an extent that you then end up with an app in your hand that can tell you now is a good time to charge your car, or what's the best time to charge your car in the next 24 hours.
Yeah.
Now you have a very actionable insight to say, this is the right time to do this, and ideally to automate it, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
I don't really want you to have to decide every night what time to run your dishwasher. I would like for the app to do the work for you.
Right, that makes sense, yeah, and starting with the places with the biggest impact, which are the data centers and the businesses and everything. Mhm. Which is why I think this podcast is so important because the people listening have the ability to influence it from the inside.
I am somebody that has always tried to change systems from the inside. So I really believe in that. I think that you can influence what your, again, like home, business, building, company, anything does. And increasingly, as all of these places electrify, switching from natural gas to electric when it comes to cooking, when it comes to heating and cooling, switching from, traditional combustion engine transportation to EVs, all of these things are opportunities. We talk a lot about how we're adding all of this demand to the grid and stressing things out, and there's lots of conversations there. But these are opportunities to decarbonize electricity, and we have a lot of power about where and when to do things, so we can use it.
So, as we're nearing the end, I want to touch a little bit on your 2026 predictions. You posted this in February.
Oh my
We're at the
gosh,
end of April right now. I'm curious which you're
nervous.
least sure about now, given that we're like 10, 11 weeks in.
The one I'm most excited about is still batteries. I am not like an energy storage expert, but I am so excited about batteries because there are so many conversations where at the end of it, you're like, oh, we just need more batteries. We just need more batteries on the grid.
True.
Like, right?
Is that
Like,
like feasible, or are we just wishing? Like, what do you think?
well, I mean, again, like the joy of spending like my days looking at electricity maps is that I know it's feasible because it's working in some places really well.
Hmm.
If you look at places like South Australia or closer to home, I mean, look at California, look at Texas. The amount of battery storage is increasing like a hockey stick right now in a handful of regions. Even just as we record this today, PJM opened up its interconnection queue for the first time since 2022. There's a really significant percentage of projects that are about battery storage. And the goal there, right? Like the sun isn't always shining and the wind isn't always blowing. And
Yep.
so if you have solar panels, like as I know from my rooftop solar at home, it is powering my everything in my house all day long and nothing in my house all night long. But adding a battery would solve that. And my whole house would run on solar 24 hours a day. That is true for lots of different types of buildings and businesses and electricity usage. So when we look at California, when we look at Texas, when we look at South Australia, when we look at a couple places in Europe, adding batteries, and when I say batteries, like ideally we're talking about grid scale battery and energy storage systems. Sometimes it's lithium ion, but there's new technologies coming. There's this amazing Form Energy project that Google is funding with Excel in Minnesota that
Hmm.
is iron, that is basically rust. Like the battery works by rusting and
Oh,
unrusting.
wow.
I am not the physicist
Interesting.
in my house, so I don't fully get it. But
Uh huh.
to me, just anything that has to do with energy storage is still the most exciting thing that's coming this year and next year and the year after that. I'm way more excited about storage than I am about anything else other than yes, like if fusion works tomorrow, we're in a really good place. But otherwise, I think storage is the place to go.
Storage. All right. Great. Ryan, this has been so lovely chatting with you. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your stories and your perspective. If people want to follow along or reach out to you, where can they go?
Sure. LinkedIn is like my number one social network these days. I
Cool.
am also on Blue Sky, but you might find more jokes and out of context soccer posts, especially as we get into World Cup season here.
Okay, great. We'll put that link and everything else we mentioned today in the show notes. And thank you again so much for joining. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been just a joy.
3 things stood out to me from that episode. Number 1, do the math. Either the math adds up or it doesn't. And if it does, that's a great conversation to have with leadership. Number 2, the tensions are real. Ryan lives in a county funded by data centers, an industry he's working to decarbonize. He worked at a company for 7 years, and they didn't share the same urgency around climate that he has. He ultimately left. There's no right or wrong answer. Don't hold them too tightly. And number 3, get trained. Learn what data you have access to and start digging. If this episode was interesting to you, please do give it a like and share it with a friend. It helps spread the word. I'm Louisa Henry, and this is Any Job Can Be a Climate Job.